Fascism, instituted by the Germans, is a form of government against dictatorship and is ruled by a one-party dictatorship. Hitler would be that one-party dictatorship. Along with fascism, Hitler instituted totalitarianism, a political concept of a mode of government that prohibits opposing parties, restricts individual opposition to the state and its claims, and exercises an extremely high degree of control over public and private life. Britain, a democracy, applied appeasement to try to stop war and allowed Hitler to expand territories unchecked. The fall of France took place from May 10th through June 25th, 1940. Hitler passes Führer-Anschluss North Degree 6, which plans for offensive German forces in the west. Hitler uses blitzkrieg tactics requiring the concentration of offensive weapons on the narrow front to defeat Britain and France. Hitler offered peace after realizing that it was more important to attack Eastern Europe before Western countries, which was rejected by Britain and France. Fall Gelb, the German tanks besieged the Allies, Great Britain, France, United States, and Russia, and pushed them all the way to Belgium. The Netherlands surrendered after being bombed by Germans. Fall Rot, or Capes Red, was when the 60 French divisions and 2 British divisions failed to beat the Germans and were pushed all the way to Paris. In Operation Daimyo, after being overcome by the Germans, Britain and France came up with an evacuation plan to prevent major damage to their fleets. While Germany occupied some of France at the beginning of World War II, the city of Vichy became the capital of the government during the war.
In 1940, German forces, also known as the Luftwaffe, launched a series of massive aerial bombing attacks on Britain. Germany was determined to conquer Britain, as they had already conquered most of Western Europe. As Winston Churchill said, "The Battle of France is over, but the Battle of Britain is about to begin." Britain was in a better position than most, as they had a strong air defense system, including well-trained fighter pilots and a strong military leader, unlike Germany, whose resources were somewhat exhausted from their previous attacks. Britain's radar system also put them in a good position, as it was able to alert them in advance of German planes and give them the exact location of those German planes. After severe losses on the German side, their military leader decided to change their strategy from attacks on Britain's military bases to attacks on London itself. Though this did catastrophic civilian damage, it ultimately failed. In fact, Germany's second attack on London, taking place on September 15th, resulted in heavy losses. Britain's fighters appeared and shot down many German soldiers. This loss was what ultimately caused Hitler to suspend the Battle of Britain and permanently postpone their planned landing on the British Isles.
June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa. Adolf Hitler launches his German army to invade the Soviet Union. By doing this, Hitler deliberately was breaking the non-aggression pact that the two countries had signed 2 years before. The invasion was the largest German military operation of World War II. This covered a front from the North Cape to the Black Sea. The Germans underestimated their opponent, leading to a great failure with attacking Russia. The failure of this operation caused Germany to face a two-front war. The operation's purpose was to enslave the Slavic population and exterminate the Jews. This kind of ruthlessness was not seen in Europe since the Mongols. The reason Hitler did this was that he wanted living space for Germans. He couldn't expand any further west. Hitler wanted to get rid of communism in Europe, and he wanted the Soviet Union's resources. Hitler thought that if the Soviet Union falls, then Britain would see its struggle against Germany as hopeless. It would also free Japan to pursue its goals to Asia, putting them on a collision course with the US. They would have no interest in supporting Britain in Europe, facing a threat in Japan. Meanwhile, Canada was sending supplies to the Soviet Union. But then the Luftwaffe army, who were German torpedo bombers, blew up Canadian ships that were sending supplies to the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa had a huge impact on World War II by turning the tide of war in favor of the Allies. This operation failed because Hitler underestimated the will of the Soviet people. He thought Stalin would give up. He overestimated the capabilities of the German army in the brutal cold of the Soviet winter against the endless amount of Soviet soldiers.
In 1937, Japan had declared war on China to try and take over some of their land. The US then gave many economic sanctions to Japan, as well as some trade embargoes in response, which didn't make Japan happy. So they wanted to destroy the US's Pacific Fleet in response to that, to try and exhort them to lift the trade embargoes and economic sanctions, and also to limit their power over the war, because they were in World War II. So at 8 a.m. on December 7th, 1941, Japanese planes flew over Pearl Harbor and sent a barrage of bombs and bullets down on the ships below. In all, the attack on Pearl Harbor destroyed or caused significant damage to around 20 ships and over 300 planes. Docks and airfields were destroyed, 2,403 people were killed, and over 1,000 were injured. But the Japanese still failed to debilitate the Pacific Fleet. FDR then declared war on Japan, and it was approved by Congress on December 8th. Germany and Italy and Japan, the Axis powers, declared war on the US 3 days later. The attack, which was made to limit the United States' international power, did not accomplish what the Japanese had it set out to do. It ended up being the reason for why the US entered the war 2 years after it had already begun.